Hi everybody. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the last topic, the planning. And today, Zim again joined us. He's real excited. So we'll see if he's a good little birdie and if he sits still so that he can listen to everything that we say. I've decided to take program 51 on Rotella for this example. Um, it's a program that was carried over from the last unit as well. We're going to see that the classes that you're going to encounter won't get really any complicated than what it is currently. So we're asked to code a student class to store the surname and 3 test marks of a student. We need to provide properties. Surname must be 3 characters long. Test marks must be between 0 and 100. If a validation fails, we need to raise an exception. 3 constructors, a default constructor, parameterized constructor with only the surname, and a constructor that takes all the data. There must be a increase test method to increase the student's test mark by a given percentage. I quickly paused the video because there's one method that was missing. We need a save test method to be called when a specific test mark must be saved. So again, the test number and this time around the mark must be provided via parameters, and we need to test that the data is good. If not, raise an exception. Calculate semester mark is the last method. It must return the semester mark and the formula is given. It's exactly the same formula than what we are going to be using for to calculate your semester mark. Lastly, we always need the toString method. MDI multiple document interface application main menu with a menu strip. There must be an add student form, an enter tests form, a view student form. In the view student form, we'd be able to increase a test and view a semester mark. We need to use a numeric up down to select the test number. I'm going to slowly start showing you why we use different controls because it would make me as a programmer my life a lot easier, and it's going to enhance the user interface, the screen, to the user. So save button in the add student form must get the surname, create a student object. So with the zeros for the tests, that's what that specific constructor would do. It's going to enable some test menu items, clear the input control, and display a confirmation message to the user. And obviously, if we encountered an error, it's going to display an appropriate message to the user. There's a store test button on an enter tests form. So a separate form, we're going to add the 3 tests, or only 1 test or 2 tests for the student. We need to get the test number, test 1, 2, or 3, and the test mark. Update the data, display a confirmation message. If we get an exception, going to display a message to the user. And then form view students. Initially, we're going to display the student data. When the user clicks on the view student mark button, we're going to call the method and display the semester mark. And when the user clicks on the increase test button, we're going to get the test number and the percentage. We're going to update the test, display the updated data, and again, if an error occurs, display a message to the user. And we need some test data as well. So the first thing you're going to do would be to download Form D right at the top of this form to do the planning. I've already done that. To save a little bit of time. Member variables, there would be then for surname test 1, 2, and 3, and remember the naming conventions that we use in VB specifically. Hey? Underscore lowercase s for the name. Underscore lowercase t for the name. Types must be string and integer. Access would always be private. We're going to provide get and set properties, and in the set properties there's some validations. 0 to 100, and the length of the surname must be at least 3 characters long. We need to provide a default constructor. It's going to update the surname and the 3 properties. It's going to assign none to the surname and just zeros to the properties. Then we get a parameterized constructor that gets the surname only. And again, it's going to update all for the properties. Assign the parameter to the properties, so the surname only and 0 to the tests. I can enhance that a little bit if we want to. And then a parameterized constructor that gets all 4 the parameters. We're going to update all 4 the properties, and we're just going to assign the parameters to the different properties. The VB steps would always be something like surname is equal to parameter surname. Test 1 is equal to parameter test 1. Test 2 would be equal to parameter test 2. And test 3 would be equal to parameter test 3. Normally in the real world, if you go do the planning, you're not going to include the VB steps. We include it so that you as beginners can see many different examples. So over here with the VB steps, that would be a 0, a 0, and a 0. And then over here, we're just going to assign none. It would have been easy if I copied the code of just now. This would be 0, and that would be 0. I actually changed the format of the document that I get you guys to download to slightly smaller font, slightly smaller text. Okay, so over here we've got the 3 methods. Then we need to include a method, calculate the semester mark. So it would be a function, and the name is calculate semester mark. It's not going to get parameters. It's going to return an integer that we can see from the class diagram. It's not going to update any properties. We need a local variable, semester mark. So declare the variables, calculate the semester mark, return the semester mark, and the formula is given to us. Rather easy. Now procedure increase test. So I'm just going to go over these. You need to go read that description carefully, before you do the planning. To save a bit of time, I'm not going to jump back to the description and to the class diagram continuously. So I've got a procedure increase test because no data must be returned that we can see from the class diagram. Which parameters, again from the class diagram, test number and percentage. We're going to update the properties test 1 or test 2 or test 3. We don't really need local variables. So right at the start, the description set, we go back um, I want us to verify that the percentage is 0 to 20. I'm going to include this just now in the document. So easiest is first check if it's not good. So if the percentage is not 0 to 20, we raise an exception. Because if the percentage was wrong, this would stop the entire procedure just here and there. If I had a percentage of 30 maybe, or -5 or something like this, this throw statement will stop the procedure the moment that it's reached. So test that the percentage is not 0 to 20. This would be the best if statement to use. Less than 0 or bigger than. Be careful. Oh, not 200. 20. And 20 then. Don't use and also. That's the biggest mistake that beginners make. The condition for the if statements are very often a little bit wrong. They don't go look at it carefully. Yeah, I want to test that it's not correct. And then if I've got a specific test, I want to include that test percentage. Otherwise, I raise an exception if I don't have test 1, 2, or 3. So test the test number and increase test 1. If it's test 2, increase that percentage. If it's test 3, increase that percentage. Otherwise, again, we raise an exception. Remember now we've got a validation for each of those tests. We're going to have a look at it as soon as we get to the VB code. In the set methods, we will need a validation to check that the different test marks are within a specific range. That was given to us over there. Can't have a test that's more than 100. We can now maybe include something like this in the documentation. If I go and increase a test by a bigger percentage, for each of those test marks I will need to do it. I can say test that the new percentage would be less or equal to 100. If it's good, I increase the test. Otherwise, my new test 1 mark must be 100. Okay, because maybe if I had a student with 90% and I say increase test 1 by 10%, then it works out to more than 100 and I get an exception. So that was not given to us, but it easily can be one of my instructions. I will need to include this in every test. So I'm not going to do that right now. We can have a look at that in a future example. Just increase, otherwise raise an exception. If I assign a value of more than 100 to the test, the set validation will stop me from doing it. It's going to raise an exception. We're going to go and test it if we want to. Then there's a safe test method. Again, it's got to take a test number and the mark. And again, we're going to update property test 1 or test 2 or test 3. So again, we test which number we've got, and we either save test 1 or test 2 or test 3, or otherwise, if I've got an incorrect test number, I raise an exception. And again, my validation in the set property will ensure that I don't assign a mark of more than 100. It's going to raise an exception as soon as I try to do that. all things that I can check. So these validations that we find in the set properties, extremely important. And then extremely important that we use the properties in the different methods. Lastly, we've got a two-string method that is a function, doesn't get parameters, it sends back a string, doesn't update any properties, it just gives me all the property values as a string back. Not really nicely user friendly. We're going to use this a lot when we save to files. Not for really any other purpose. It's not good enough for that in any case. Okay, if I now go to the VB code. Oh, no. We need to have a look at the application first. Okay, so again, you go read the description carefully, slowly. I've got an object of the type student in module. I'm going to call it module data. It's got public access, initially no object created. Okay. To display the data later on in form view student, I'll get to it. We can have a look at that. Let's go have a look at form add student first. There's a button click. I need to save the student. I need to get the name with an input control. I very often like to use a label to display messages for the user, not message box. If something just are okay and I just want to display a confirmation message to the user, I use a label that I normally change to a blue font. If there's a problem, we use message box. We display a dialog box because the user must see the problem, must stop, you must act upon it, and then the program can continue. But just to say everything is good, a label is a little bit better. I am going to use object student from the module in this bit of code. So, declare the variables. I'm going to make provision for exceptions. I get the name. I create the object. I display some successful message. I would clear the input controls, enable the menu items, and if I get an error, I'm going to display the message. And we can see the VB code that's important over there on that side. In form enter tests, where I enter the tests, this time around we've got a user interface control that's a numeric up down. I'm going to get the test mark using a text box, and I'm still using a message label to display messages. I'm going to use the object as well from the module. So the steps in English: declare the variables, start with a try, I get the test number in the mark, I save the test mark for the test, for the object use a method, I display successful, clear the input controls, display a message if there was a problem. In form view student, right at the start when the form is loaded, I'm just going to call my procedure that I've got a little way up to display the student data. If I go to that procedure, I skipped it just now. Procedure show student and form view students. Just display all the object data in the list box. Something like that. And then in form view students, we've got a button, increase test. It's got to get a test number and a percentage. We set in the specifications using an input box from the user. All output would be displayed in the list box. The code will use object student. So I need to declare the variables, start with exception handling, get the test number and the percentage, Save the test mark. For that specific test, I'm going to call a method for the student. Display successful, clear the input. If there's a problem, display a message. And again, we've got the VB code. And the last method in the form, view student, button view semester mark. I'm just going to call the method that calculates the semester mark and display it. And I can do it in 2 steps if I want to, or I can just display it directly. So if we now go to the VB program, and I've coded that already. First of all, the student class. Always switch on the options because this is going to help you as a beginner. If you do things wrong, VB is going to moan at you, tell you, hey, you're doing something wrong. Go look at it. So remember my attributes, or then we call it member variables in VB. The name depends on the language. Would always be private. It's always going to start with an underscore, and it's always going to start with a lowercase character. And then every attribute, every member variable gets a public, we can say, property. So this is just to remind you guys. You obviously don't need to code that. So we need a surname member variable and a capital S property surname of the type string. The get method is really simple always. It just returns that. But now the set property must first validate that the data is good. If the data is good, it assigns the data to the surname. If it's not good, we raise an exception. Test 1, the member variable, gets a property with a capital T, test 1. That's Zim, that helped us a little bit. The return method just returns the member variable. The set property changes the data, but before it changes it, first the validation. Is the data between 0 and 100? Yes. Assign, otherwise, nice message. That must be an integer. That's why I've got a problem. So see, that's why we need options. So the test 2, exactly the same, but now my message says, nice and descriptive, test 2 must be. And then test 3, exactly the same, message says test 3 must be 0 to 100. I've got my default constructor that just assigns programmer, me the programmer, I assign those values, none and zeros. I've got a constructor that only gets a surname and assigns only that surname to the property. Always use the properties, otherwise assign 0 to the test properties. And then a constructor that gets all 3 the values, 4 actually, 3 tests and the surname, and every time it takes the parameter, assign that to the property. The order in which you code these functions and procedures, the methods in the class, is really arbitrary. So normally all the member variables at the top, each member variable with its properties, then all the constructors, and then you can add any of the methods that you want to. We add the toString method right at the end. Okay, so that's the specific order in which you need to code. But whether you code increase test or calculate semester mark first, doesn't matter. So calculates a semester mark, returns a double. calculates the mark according to our formula given, and it returns it because it's a function. It's got to send back the data. My increased test method takes the test number and the percentage increase. And just to tell you why we use constants, I've included those. So now we validate that the data is within a certain range. If not, raise an exception, and I use the constant values in the exception message so that if we decide the maximum change from 20 to 30, all the other data would be updated as well. The reason for constant values. And now I've got the if statement to increase each one of the tests by the given percentage, or then raise an exception. And again, if this works out to more than 100, the set property is going to raise an exception as soon as I try to assign this. So, procedure save test, again get the test number and a mark. It's got the if statement to test the test number, and it assigns the mark to the relevant test. Otherwise, raise an exception. And right at the end, I've got the toString method to return the data. Now this data is not user-friendly. I'm not normally going to use it when I display output to the user. If we now go have a look at the VB program itself, I've got a main menu, I've got a form add student, and actually normally FRM, not just form, would be used. So I go update all the data. I'm just going to, while I see it, rename everything. FRM main or form main menu. And there we go. Okay, after we coded the student class, let's go have a look at the module. So switch on the options, and I've got public object student as student. We use them public so that all the forms can access my object variable. Object variable would be no Zim. Zim is a little bit naughty. Wants to bite everything. Zim is getting a little bit frustrated with me sitting and talking. Okay. For main menu then, it's got a menu. The thing that would be interesting or that's necessary is that enter tests and view students, those menu items are initially disabled. We don't want the user. User must first go and save a student. If we then go to the add student form, user can enter a name. I've got a little label there, initially no data on it. If we go have a look at the coding, exactly according to the planning, get the name, create the object, display a message, everything is successful. Enable the two menus, and this would now be in a different form, so I need to start with the name of the form. Form main dot menu this enabled would be true. Form main dot menu this enabled would be true. Okay, because they are in a different form, I need to start with the name of the form. If an exception is raised, display an error message And this time I included a few more things. We want this program to be as user-friendly as possible. So we display an error message and a title and just an OK button for the user. If I go to the form where we enter tests, I've got a numeric up-down control, minimum 1, maximum 3, and it would increase by 1. A text box for the percentage, again a message label and a button to store the tests. If we have a look at the source code, declare the variables, get the two values from the user, call the method to save the test mark, display the confirmation message, and something interesting that I'm showing you would be to automatically update the test mark. I'll show you as soon as we run the program. We automatically increase the numeric up down so that the user can enter the first test, second test, and third test with as little effort as possible. And again, if you've got a problem, go and display an error message to the user. Form view students, got a list box and two buttons. Right at the top, it's got a show data procedure to display the data. Button view just displays the semester mark. Form load just called show data. Button increase gets the test number and the percentage increase. It's going to call the method, display the data, and add a message to the user to say the test was increased. If we've got a problem, we do so. Okay, so let's run the program. Okay, so right at the start, the user can exit or only save a student. So if we go save Sue, get a message, Sue was saved successfully. If I close this, I can go to the menu, I can view. Stu, the name is Sue and no test marks initially. Have a look at how nicely the input for the test marks works now. I can enter a percentage, so let's go for 55. If I click on store test, okay, so we can have this message a little bit neater. 55 is saved, but test number automatically increases. So let's say second mark was 66, third mark was 77, and I can only save 3 marks, so this doesn't increase anymore. If I go have a look now, I've got those 3 marks. I can view the semester mark of the student. If I wanted to increase a specific test, test 1 must increase by 10%, so it increases to 60. If I increase it again, test 1 must increase again by 10%, it increases. And now we can start with a lot of error handling things. So test 1, no, let's go for test 4, must increase by 20%. I get an error message. Test number must be 1 to 3. So if I go say increase test 1 by 50%, again an error message. And this time we've got a nice message over there. View semester mark won't really give us any marks. If I want to go and enter a different test, I can say test 2 must be 102%. And there I get test 2 must be 0 to 100. So if we change it to, let's go change it to 25. Perfectly fine. View, now it's 25, like that. So now the semester mark works out to something a little bit lower. The nice thing about the numeric up-down control is I can only choose 1, 2, and 3. I can't choose anything else over there. If I go and enter a wrong value, we get an error message. If I want to start over with a new student, we go for Ben. We just go there first, get an error message. User can see the data. So if I go view students, there we go. Let's say Ben only wrote one test, got 51%. I can go view. The test 1 is 51, the rest is 0. Once you coded an application, you must now test that it performs perfectly fine. So I didn't like the error or the confirmation message in the enter test. Over there, I didn't write like this. So let's go for test and then the number. Let's go for save. So test 1 saved with test mark. That would be a lot better. And in a normal situation, you will go and test your program again. Thank you very much. Hope this assisted you.